Good evening and welcome from the Ruth Hayman Trust. A very warm welcome, and we're really looking forward to this interview between our two distinguished patrons, Sue MacGregor and Lord Alf Dubs. But just before this interview gets started, I'd just like to say a few words about the Trust and our links with refugees, because this is our event for Refugee Week. And refugees do have a special place for the Trust. Ruth Hayman herself came here to seek sanctuary. She was a distinguished lawyer, and she defended many anti-apartheid activists. And she fled here from the regime to London. She set up English classes for people who'd come to settle here. I think they were mainly women at that time. And she was also one of the founder members of NATECLA, the National Association for Teachers of English and Community Languages. And it was in her name that the Ruth Hayman Trust, NATECLA set up the trust in her name. And that was in 1983, so we've been going quite some time. And certainly refugees are very important to us. Most of our grants are for education for refugees and asylum seekers. Now, last year we gave 201 awards for over £90,000. And of these, 167 were people coming here to seek sanctuary. So it was over 80% were refugees and asylum seekers. And they came from 52 different countries of the world. The highest number came from Syria, which is hardly surprising given what is happening in Syria at the moment. And we supported them on a range of courses from basic English right up until professional qualifications. And I'll just give a couple of examples. We supported 10 refugees from Syria to study ESOL, English, at West Lothian College in Scotland, because the Scottish government, for some reason, withdrew funding for Scottish national qualifications. So we were able to step in and fund the full amount in liaison with the college and a refugee organisation. So that was for basic English. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we supported 7 dentists for the exams they need to take to work here, which are incredibly expensive. They're in the £1,000, and £1,000 is our maximum award. So just to mention 2 dentists who we supported with £500 each in March. And that was what is hopefully on the final stage of their long journey to work here as dentists, for exams for the membership of the Faculty of Dental Surgeons. So it doesn't have to be a large amount. Even small amounts can make a real difference to refugees' lives. And I'd like to introduce you to Naima, who is my fellow trustee, who was herself many years ago a beneficiary and got quite a small amount. I think, Naima, it was just about £100. So
yes,
can you tell us a bit about yourself? Everyone. Tell us a bit about yourself and if that helped you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naima. As Mary have told you, I came to this country as a refugee. And while I was waiting for my papers of stay to be decided, I wanted to learn the language and go into further education and get a qualification to find a job and work. So I come from Somalia as a refugee, and that is the time when I was in a limbo situation and I couldn't work, where I come across the trust for help to apply for university, and I needed to do a test, IELTS test, which I couldn't afford at the time, and the trust paid £100 to do that test, to access university, which helped a lot. And it was many years ago, but I remember vividly.
And tell us about how you got on at university and what happened after that and what you're doing now.
Yes, after learning the language, I joined university. I qualified as a pharmacist, learned pharmacy, got a degree from University of Hertfordshire. And after that, I joined a big company, and I work among many pharmacists and pharmacy technicians who are preparing prescriptions for patients who suffer cancer, and patients who cannot take food by mouth. So we prepare parenteral nutrition. So that's my job at the moment, working with my qualification.
That's really fantastic, Naima. And of course, you're also working as a voluntary trustee with the trust, which is terrific for us. And just to say that all the trustees, like Naima and me, we're all volunteers. We don't have any paid workers. So that means that we have very, very low overheads. I think it was about 99% of the money we raised went directly to applicants, which I think is really, really good. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you, Naima. And I'm now going to pass over to Sue MacGregor and Lord Alf Dubs, who both need no introduction from me, but I will say just a couple of things. Sue MacGregor has actually been a patron of the Trust for over 20 years, which I think is absolutely amazing. And the number of times, Sue, that you've helped us. I think the last occasion was when we had an evening with Peter Hayne, Lord Peter Hayne, when you interviewed him. And that was before lockdown, in the days when we were able to actually meet in person. So Sue has had a very distinguished career, and I'm sure you all know about her fantastic career with the BBC. And Lord Alf Dubs is a more recent patron, and we were absolutely delighted when he agreed to become a patron. And this was just before lockdown, so we've never had the chance actually to meet in person, Lord Dubs. But let's hope that later in the year this might be possible. So I'll now hand over to you, Sue, and it's all yours.
Oh, thank you very much
for having me.
Oh, yes, and thank you. I don't dare call you Alf immediately, Lord Dubs, but I think somebody has muted you. For once, we can't hear you, Lord Dubs.
Well, first of all, you please call me Alf. Of course you dare.
Is that all right?
Preferably.
Oh,
yes.
good.
Thank you very much.
You may remember that I was lucky enough to interview you before a few years ago. I mean, I know you do about 100 interviews, per week, but you're such a good talker. What I'd like to do, if I may, Alf, is there'll be a lot of people seeing you for the first time, sort of live, as it were, possibly watching on their own screens. And what I'd like to do is, because it is such a fascinating story, your life, am I allowed to say that you were born in 1932, and mathematicians will work out that you're roughly 88? Is that still correct?
You're allowed to say all these things. Yes, of course, it's correct.
But what I'd like to ask or inform some people about who don't know what your childhood was like was you were born in Prague when it was still part of Czechoslovakia, I think, at that point. Your
right.
father was Jewish, your mother, I think, was not, and you were 6 after the Nazis occupied Prague, and that must have been a really frightening time for you. And it did indeed end up with you taking part through your father, probably he must have arranged it, or your father and mother, that you went on this famous train, the Kindertransport, and managed to get out of Prague at the right time. Would you like to tell people what that was like for a 6-year-old boy?
Well, yes, as far as best I can remember, because when the Germans occupied Prague in March 1939, my father, as you said, being Jewish, he left immediately. My mother tried to leave and was refused permission, so she then put me on a Kindertransport. The German occupation was very dramatic. As I've said to people before, we had to tear a picture of the Czech President Beneš, out of our school books, stick in a picture of Hitler. There were German soldiers all over the place. I don't think I can claim to have understood the significance of what was going on. I knew there were tensions, I knew there were anxieties. My father disappeared, but on the whole, I think at the age of 6, I was simply carried over by the what was happening without fully understanding it till some years later.
Yeah, so and you weren't even with your parents at that point on the Kindertransport, were you?
No. My father. I was very luckier than many, because my father had escaped, as I said, and he'd got to London, so he had somebody waiting for me, and my mother had to say goodbye to me, not knowing whether she would see me again. So to that extent, yes, I was on my own. I didn't know anybody. There were about 150 of us on this train. I can still see my mum standing on the platform, Prague station. German soldiers with swastikas in the background, lots of tearful parents. Again, I was one of the youngest, 6 years old, so I'm not sure I fully understood. Well, I don't think I understood what was happening.
But I think she gave you a parcel of food which you didn't eat for 2 days. Is that right?
Well, it was meant to be my food for the journey. But when I got to London, my father saw it in my little knapsack and said, "But you haven't touched your food the whole time." Well, I wasn't aware I hadn't touched my food, but there it is. Oh. That's what happened. That's what he said.
And you didn't have any English, did you? Did you have any words of English in your head at all when you got to London?
I think I had 2 or 3 words of English, but basically I spoke Czech and German. And as I say to people, if I ever make a bad speech, well, English is my 3rd language. I'm doing my best. But to be serious, at the age of 6, one learns English pretty quickly because it's a matter of survival in a school playground. The older one gets, the more difficult it is. So to that extent, it was almost seamless by just learning English. I had a few hiccups on the way, but it didn't take me long.
How long did it take you, though, really to feel that you were at home in Britain?
Well, I don't know. I was probably regarded a bit odd at school, so I suppose I managed all right. I suppose I managed all right within about a year or 2. I think my mother. What happened was, because my mother escaped at the last minute. She arrived in England the day before the war started, and then my father died a few months later. So it was just my mum and me. And I think the problem of being in another country was much tougher for my mum, widowed, no job, no income, nothing. Was much tougher for her than for me, because I just went along with the flow at school.
What was your ambition at that stage? Let's put you now as old as maybe about 10. And you were presumably at a good school and enjoying it by then, hopefully.
Well, it was more precise. It's a bit more complicated than that. The Czech government had a boarding school for Czech child refugees in Britain. So my mum sent me to that, and that was at the age of 10. So in a sense, I was there with a lot of Czechs. Again, I was one of the youngest, with a lot of fellow Czechs. But yes. It kept my Czech going a bit, and I learned lots of useful things, and it was quite an interesting experience.
And by the time you left school in your teens, did you go off to university immediately? And did you know what you wanted to be?
Well, I was passionate. I then, from about the age of 12 or 13, I became passionately interested in politics, more than most of my contemporaries. And I think it was because I was puzzling as to why what had happened to me. And I think at that point, I was really trying to understand, what Hitler meant, Nazis and so on, and the significance of it all. And I think I came to the conclusion, I'm trying not to be wise after the event. It's easy to be like an Einstein at the age of 12. I certainly wasn't over now. But I think my thinking was roughly this, that if evil men can do these terrible things in politics to their fellow human beings, maybe politics can also be used to reverse the process. So I was passionately interested in politics all the time from then onwards, and I still am.
When you say politics, I'm thinking that you probably were then more interested in the Labour Party than the Conservative Party, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. I was well, I'll tell you a little story. So my mum came the 1945 general election. We were living in Manchester, and I was following all the Labour candidates. They're all on posters and so on. And then my mum took me for a week to a boarding house near Blackpool, just for a week's holiday. Great, because she had a job by then. And because of the votes coming back from the soldiers in the Far East, they didn't start counting the votes at night. They started counting the votes in the morning. And it was 6 weeks after election day to allow for the ships to bring the ballot papers back from Burma and so on. The voting started one morning, and there was no television. So the BBC had a loudspeaker in the village, in the little town, and they were going to have a lunchtime announcement of the results. So the people in the voting house said, "Oh, go and have a look and tell us what's happening." So anyway, the lunchtime score, I remember something like Labour 130, Conservatives 20. So I went back very proudly to the boarding house and said, "What's happening?" And I said, "Labour 120, the Conservatives 30 or something." And I heard a voice say, "Oh my God, it's the end of England."
Well, it wasn't quite. Anyway, Blackpool sounds a nice place to be for somebody when you were that age, that young age. But were you then sort of keen to be a Labour MP? I mean, or was it too early for you to judge whether that would be good for you or not?
Well, my ambition was to go to the London School of Economics, which I thought was a good place for Labour people to go as a university. And my ambition politically was to see if I could get onto a local council. I decided that being a refugee, English being my third language, what chance did I have of becoming an MP? And it stayed like that for some time. And then I happened to meet lots of Labour Party people, of course, and one of them said, "Go on, have a go for Parliament." So I did become a councillor, but I did have a go for Parliament, and eventually that worked.
Well, that certainly did work. But were you conscious during this period? Were people are still sometimes in Britain rather suspicious of foreigners? And I just wonder whether you felt that you were not quite yet part, a real sort of Brit, as it were, in these councils.
I can give you two little stories about that. First of all, my mum had a terrible job finding jobs and things, and she was turned down for a job she'd done for 6 months, turned down, nobody appointed, applied again, and so on. And what happened then was she heard one of the interview panel say, after her second failed appointment, "We're not giving a job to that bloody foreigner." My mother did sound much more Central European, or totally Central European, and she was so upset, and I shared that feeling. She was agonized because she didn't know what she was going to do. She couldn't stay in a job where she'd been turned down twice and so on. So I was, on the other side of it, my first go at Parliament was for a seat I wasn't going to win, which was the cities of London and Westminster, which is after all the central constituency in London, with the House of Parliament sitting there and so on. And my Conservative opponent was Christopher Tugendhat. So we had the spectacle of a refugee from Vienna competing with a refugee from Prague. Now he won, and he went on to do great things, European Commission and so on. But the media never picked up that story. I was quite surprised. I know
that's because in fact, you must have probably liked each other quite a lot because of that.
We're in the Lords together, and there was one time he mentioned the fact that we'd competed, and I interrupted him to say in a loud voice, "Yes, but you won." people laughed, but yeah, we're quite friendly.
And at what point was it close to that time at all? Did you become really interested? And because we want to talk quite a lot about this, if we have time for it, about what it's about, the whole purpose of this really is to try and make life better for refugee children now as then. When did you first see the possibility of being able to help refugee children? It wasn't that time, perhaps, but a little later on in your life.
Well, yes, it was a bit later on. But when I got to the, well, I was quite keen. I was a local councillor, and I was quite keen that we should do more to support Uganda Asians and people like that.
And go back to the 70s. That would have been.
That's right. Yes, I was a councillor in Paddington in the 70s, and we actually, although it was a Conservative-run council, we actually had a majority of both parties were split on the issue. A majority saying we should give some housing to Uganda Asian families coming to Britain. So I was conscious of it then, and I was also conscious of race relations and all those issues. But I suppose then I got to the Commons, and there's one little story I'm going to tell you if I may. So
yes,
I was
please.
put on a small committee dealing with the British Nationality Act, public committee, or standing committee as it then was called, and so I thought there were 18 of us MPs, all parties, and here am I, a naturalised Brit, determining the future pattern of British citizenship. And I thought, what other country would give me that opportunity? I had to keep pinching myself that it was me there, or me asking Margaret Thatcher questions. I just couldn't believe it. However, I was then given, in my second term, I was then given a job on the front bench and on the Home Affairs team. And one of my responsibilities was immigration, refugees, and race relations. So I was involved from then on. Then I lost my seat after 8 years in the Commons, and eventually I became chief executive of the Refugee Council. So that was for 8 years I was doing that.
Yes, and what sort of refugees were they at that point in your life?
Well, the most dramatic ones was when the British government agreed to take several thousand Bosnians from those horrible Serb concentration camps, as I call them, towards the end of the Bosnian War. And we in the the Refugee Council and the Red Cross were jointly asked by the Home Office to provide emergency accommodation, reception centres and so on. But the previous refugees, there'd been quite a lot of Vietnamese, had still been coming and were still coming. And so those are the countries, and of course there have been some Hungarians some years earlier, but the Refugee Council were involved in those. And of course people were escaping from persecution in other parts of the world, from parts of Africa and so on.
And were children prominent amongst these? They must have been. Did parents at that point, say the ones from Central Africa, did they actually bring their children with them? Were they allowed to?
Well, some of the children even came on their own.
Already at that point,
they were flown in, and we were busy trying to find families and support and so on for them. So even then, it was quite an issue. I should mention that Nicky Winton, the man who organised the Kindertransport from Prague, who I got to know very well, he died about 3 years ago. Great man. Well, I would say he's a great man. He saved my life.
Yes, tell us how he saved your life.
He saved my life because he organised the Kindertransport, and without the Kindertransport, I don't think I'd have survived the Holocaust. So it was straightforward. And he said to me on one occasion, "Can we not do something about the refugee children that are coming here from parts of Africa?" And I said, "That's a good point. Maybe I think we should." Anyway, to cut a long story short, I then lost my seat. I was the Refugee Council for some years, and then I was put in the Lords. And that's where my campaigning on child refugees actually got a new lease of life.
Yes. Was that a time of great hard work for you, or you're very good at making speeches and everything? Did you manage to convince people that these children must be looked after properly, and especially those who have left parents behind?
Well, the story, very briefly, was this: that we discovered, it was 2016, just after the terrible events in Syria, and we learned that there were 95,000 unaccompanied child refugees somewhere in Europe, particularly in
95,000.
95,000, according to Save the Children, and they were in northern France, in the jungle in Calais, in Italy, and in Greece. And actually, what was even more shocking was we learned from Interpol, the police body, that 10,000 of these children had just simply disappeared. Well, if one child disappears in Britain, we all go hunting and searching, and it's a disaster. But not 10,000 children. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I moved an amendment to an immigration bill that happened to be going through the Lords to say that we should take 3,000 of the refugees that were in Europe. A very small number. But I was trying to
3,000 for Great Britain, is that right?
3,000 for this country, yes.
Yeah. Was that resisted by some people?
Well, it was resisted by the government. Theresa May was Home Secretary, and the government didn't want it to happen. And I was being, Theresa May as Home Secretary asked me to go and see her and asked me to withdraw the amendment. This was before the Lords voted on it, and I said, "Why should I?" And she said, "Well, if these children come, others will follow." And I said, "But this is shocking." I said to her, we can't turn our backs on children sleeping in the jungle, what was in the jungle in Calais, sleeping on streets, vulnerable to traffickers, to criminality, to prostitution. We just can't turn our back on them. So we parted company, and in parliamentary terms, it passed the Lords with a big majority. It got the Commons where it was slightly defeated, went back to the Lords with a bigger majority, although we had to drop the 3,000 figure for technical parliamentary gobbledygook reasons. Anyway.
But a lot of these children then did actually were allowed to stay in Britain.
Well, then what? Yes, but could I just, as one step before that, what happened was that in the course of this parliamentary toing and froing with my bill, with my amendment, British public opinion suddenly woke up to what was happening. I think it was pictures of people drowning in the Mediterranean. It was a Syrian boy called Alan Kurdi drowned on the Mediterranean beach, and people woke up to this. And I think public opinion suddenly took over, and public opinion said these children should come. And they brought pressure to bear on government supporting MPs. I've always made this cross party. I've never made this the property of one political party, but government supporting MPs came under pressure. So Theresa May asked me to see her again. She was still Home Secretary, and said the government proposed to accept the amendment. And they did. In a somewhat niggardly manner, they accepted the amendment, but they kept the numbers small.
And Theresa May, did she ever sort of renege on that at all?
Well, no. I mean, what she said was, or what the government then said was, that they're going to limit the number to, remember the original amendment was 3,000. We had to drop the figure, but the government told me they'd accept the letter and spirit of my amendment. And then what happened was that the government said very arbitrarily, we can only take 480. And I said, why? And they said, because local authorities cannot find any more foster families to take more than the 480. Well, I'm afraid I could only disprove that, because I know from work we've done that the local authorities were willing and able to find more foster families to take the children. So that was just a negative thing. And the second arm to this was, of course, family reunion. That apart from my amendment, which was for children that didn't have family here, there was also a provision in the Dublin Treaty, an EU treaty, that we should take children. A child in an EU country could apply to join relatives in another EU country. So a Syrian boy in France could apply to join a family in, say, Birmingham.
Was it your opinion then that most of the children who did come through, and it was always interesting that the Lords were more liberal about this, I think, than the Commons. Did any of them actually not find that they had parents at all to welcome them? I mean, were some of them absolutely lost and left?
The 480 that came under my First Amendment were specifically children that did not have family in Britain, so you had
to rely on councils to look after them.
Well, the model was in the main that local authorities would find foster families. They had to be qualified. We had to protect children as well. So the potential foster families, if they hadn't already been vetted, had to be vetted. But having said that, they would then foster the children and provide them with home, love, affection, and then a chance to go on with education.
And did that work on the whole? I mean, did some of the children run away, perhaps?
Well, on the whole, it worked. Of course, there were problems. Look, there was a Syrian boy who said to me once, he saw his father blown up in front of him by a bomb in Aleppo or Damascus. When one has been through that, when one has gone through these terribly frightening long journeys, perhaps 6 months or longer, one has lived in a terrible camp, or was left of a camp in Calais or on the Greek islands, people are going to be shocked and traumatized, terribly shocked and traumatized. So of course there will be difficulties. And one of my other campaigns is actually to provide better mental health support for children who they may not need it, but they may, and it should be available.
Is it available sort of largely now, or better than it was?
It's patchy. In some areas, it's quite good. In some areas, it is patchy. And of course, children don't want to be museum pieces either. We can't say you must have a mental health problem because of what you've been through. That's entirely the wrong thing. There was a survey we did, and one survey boy said, "Don't treat me like a mental health case. I want to sing and dance and play football." So
Yes.
And indeed, the ambition has to be, or the aim has to be, to normalize life for these young people as much as possible, to normalize them, to enable them to, as it were, behave like other children of their age, to help them get over their terrible experiences.
Can you distinguish between refugees and migrants? People often ask, what is a migrant and how is that person different from a refugee?
Oh, well, okay. You've opened up a big issue there. Look, a refugee is someone who has fled for safety in another country because of a fear of violence, torture, persecution, and possibly death. So there are people fleeing for safety, and they should be protected by United Nations, the 1951 Geneva Convention. A migrant is somebody who wants to move to another country. It's not unworthy to want to move to another country, but it doesn't give you that human rights protection. It is simply whether the country you want to move to is willing to take you and whether you can qualify with their requirements and so on. So migrants are people who flee for safety. They're vulnerable, they've had terrible experiences, and they're covered by international convention. The difficulty is determining who qualifies, because they come here and they may say, look, I've had terrible experience. And then it's the job of the authorities here. Hopefully they do it fairly, but there are all sorts of hiccups in this, of determining whether they have a well-founded fear of persecution or not. And there are quite a few arguments about that.
I know you feel passionately that the right to seek asylum is a fundamental human right, but there are, of course, lots of people who don't feel that way, and we may get some questions about that afterwards. But how hopeful are you that people will become more sympathetic towards the terrible journeys that some of these families, and particularly the children with them, have taken to get here?
Well, I think my feeling is that if we tell people in this country what it is that these young people have gone through, the terrible experiences, I quoted the boy in Aleppo, the fear, dangerous journeys, victims of trafficking and so on. And I think people in this country will become or are sympathetic if the message is explained, if the story is explained to them. Of course, there's some who are not happy and they oppose it. But insofar as they understand, they do. On the other hand, there have been ups and downs in this. I'm afraid the Brexit referendum did turn the clock back.
I was going to ask you whether that made a difference, actually, to things.
Well, I fear it did, because I think it caused tensions, it caused conflict, and it made some people, refugees who are here, fearful because they were being told by their former neighbours to get out of the country. And I know stories that happened. I find that deeply shocking. So we've got to work our way, get over that again, and make sure that people who get here, we give them the feeling that they're welcome. They should be welcome, and they have certain rights in life, but they should be welcome, and they're entitled to education and love and affection. What more basic things should young people have than that?
Do you think Great Britain has more unaccompanied children still than any other country in Europe?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I think, I mean, our government says we have quite a few. No, I think the Germans and the Swedes, for example.
How many do you think we've got here? Just it's difficult to be accurate.
I don't know the exact number, but
I've got somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000. I mean, they must be,
maybe more. I hope it's more than that. But it's certainly, the numbers are not large. And look, all I'm arguing, and I've been arguing all along, is that we should take our share. I'm not saying we can take them all, by no means, but I think we should take our share along with other European countries. And that was the aim of my amendment, was the 3,000 figure then. And it's still my aim that we should take our share and be sensitive to children who have some links to this country, particularly those who've got some family here. What's more basic a human right than to find safety with members of one's family?
So you're obviously still a keen sort of warrior about this subject. Well,
I try and be. I mean, there are many voluntary organisations such as yours who such as ours, when I say yours, ours, the Ruth Hayman Trust, but others, like Safe Passage and so on, who have a high level of commitment. There are some wonderful. I mean, we heard at the beginning, the Ruth Hayman Trust is run by volunteers, and there's some wonderful volunteers working with refugees in this country, like the Ruth Hayman Trust. There are some wonderful volunteers working in what's left of the jungle in Calais or on the Greek islands. So there are a lot of young people from this country who work with and for to support their vulnerable fellow human beings. And these people won't let me stop any more than I want to stop.
Well, now, in a moment, it would be nice to field some questions from people who we can't see, but who are interested in this subject and who will have been listening with great interest to what you said. Steve, have you got some questions to give us? Hello? This is a question from Judith. Steve is our engineer, our very clever engineer, and and this is a question from Judith, who's been listening. Please ask Alf how he became involved with the Ruth Hayman Trust in particular. Well,
of course, I knew about the good work you're doing for quite a long time, but I think you invited me to become more associated with the Trust. It was a lovely invitation. I felt very honored and privileged to be asked, and I was delighted to accept. So, that's the way of locking politicians into something. But no, if an organization does such good work as the Ruth Hayman Trust does, I couldn't do less than just agree when you invite me to join you. So that's what happens, straightforward.
Okay. Any more questions coming up? From Victoria, here's one, which Steve has gathered for you, Alf. From Victoria, if you could speak to your 6-year-old self, this is an interesting question, what would you tell him?
Well, a 6-year-old, or I'll interpret it as a little bit older as well.
Yes.
Well, I would say several things. First of all, one is learn English. Okay, point number one. Secondly, believe in yourself. Believe that there are things you can do. Don't feel you should be deterred from doing things. Set your sights high. This can be a wonderful country. It can be full of wonderful opportunities, but you've got to believe in yourself. I didn't believe in myself for a long time. I had to be encouraged. Well, no, I know, because I said I can't stand for Parliament. I can't do any of these things. I didn't believe I could do that. I didn't have that sort of self-confidence. So no, I was not at all self-confident when I was younger. I may not be now, but I certainly wasn't then. And so I'd say to a young refugee, believe in yourself, set your sights high, believe that you can do things, and persevere. And with a little bit of luck, persevere, and doors in this country, I hope, will be open to you.
Here's a question from a namesake of mine, from Sue, another Sue. What do you think, Alf, about the government's new plan for immigration? I think that's the one that was featured in the Queen's speech this year.
And it will be.
That's quite an interesting one. Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. Thank you. Well, it will be the subject of legislation which will be presented to the Commons and then the Lords in the not too distant future. Well, there are a number of things I don't like about it. For one thing, and I'm very nervous about it, the government is saying that your acceptability as a refugee depends upon whether you have come legally or not legally.
Now we come to an interesting subject, yes.
And that, I think, is crucial. You see, one of the things I've been campaigning for is that there should be legal paths to safety. Because if we give people a legal path to safety, they don't rely on traffickers, and they can come properly, and they can come, everything can be planned, and so on. If there are no legal paths to safety, then young people do what we would do in their position, which is if we have, particularly our family here or other reasons to other connection with this country, we get on the back of an unsafe dinghy. It must be desperate for people to risk their lives in that way, but clearly the desperation is a sign of how much they want to be able to do it. So one of my criticisms of the government's document is that they are closing down on legal paths to safety. They say you've got to come from Jordan. It's worthwhile coming from Jordan or Lebanon or Turkey, that's fine. But to close the door on the hundreds, if not thousands, of refugees, particularly children who are in Europe at the moment, to close the door on them and say you can't come to Britain, because it's supposed to stop trafficking. Well, I'm afraid it won't stop trafficking. It's a field day for traffickers. If the government close the door, allowing a legal path, then if there are no legal paths, the traffickers have a field day.
Yes, that sort of does make sense to me. But most people, I would guess, who just casually heard somebody like your good self saying, it doesn't matter whether they take a legal or an illegal route to come into Britain, sounds a bit sort of, not quite right.
Well,
you understand that some people would, I understand why you say that the illegal things just aren't really what they need.
Well, I prefer to call it irregular rather than illegal, because illegal, to call a human being illegal is not very nice either.
Irregular, yes,
is a better word.
But look, I know, unfortunately, that was the word used, wasn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is the word used, but I just try and make it clear. The dilemma for people is that they've come halfway across the world, some of them, and they want to find safety in this country. It's only a small number. Most of them stay in France and Germany and so on, but they want to find safety. And I would like as many as possible to come legally, to come regularly, to come in a planned way, so that they don't risk their lives and the traffickers don't have a field day. That surely is the most humane and sensible way for them to come here. And the government's proposal is to close that particular.
It does sound, yeah. So things haven't really improved lately in terms of how easy it is for people to get to this country, or perhaps I should reverse the phrase and say how difficult it is for people and their children to get here.
They've got worse because the government is trying to close these routes, and the government have also so far closed the route of family reunion, the one that used to exist under the European Union, which stopped at the end of December, which they have not reopened. So a refugee child in say Calais, who's got to Calais, who's got an uncle in Birmingham, can't get here anymore. And again, we're pushing the government on that one.
Can I ask you, or bring forward the questions that have been asked by Tash, who says, I think Tash must be female, but forgive me if you're not, Tash. In your amazing journey and career, who has inspired you most?
Well, I've got a double answer to that. Clearly, Nicholas Winton, who organized the Kindertransport from Prague and saved 669 lives, must be on my list. But I tell you who inspired me most. It's the volunteers, as I mentioned earlier. It's the volunteers from in this country or from this country who work with refugees, whether they're volunteers for the Ruth Hayman Trust or they're volunteers for an organization like Safe Passage or Care for Calais. The volunteers, young people who are doing this for their fellow human beings, whether they're doing it in towns and cities in this country or they're doing it in refugee camps or what's left of refugee camps in Greece and France. They're the people I think that I feel whenever I've met them, I feel both inspired and humbled that there are people willing to do so much for their fellow human beings. And I think that's terrific. And they should get all the public praise they can get, because we tend to forget about them.
Oh, well, I absolutely agree with you. I do. And, we know that the Ruth Hayman Trust relies entirely, as Mary told us, pretty much entirely on people who do it as volunteers. My latest meeting with volunteers who did a great job was the people who vaccinated me in January and March. I mean, they were under the supervision of doctors, but they come into, there were hundreds of people wanting almost a panic of people coming into this particular place near where I live.
But could I add to answer the question? Of course, the third people are the refugees themselves. I find some of them such impressive young people.
Yes.
Committed to getting education, to working. And some of them said, we want to give back to this country whatever we can. People who are absolutely terrific. So there are three lots of people: the volunteers, Nicholas Winton, the volunteers, and the refugees themselves. They're the three lots that have really impressed me.
Well, here's another question for you, which is from Meg. What helped you, Lord Dubbs, to believe in yourself?
Well,
we sort of skated around that a little earlier, didn't we? But
I feel I'm on a psychiatrist's couch here. Well, look, you know, my mother didn't know much about this country. You know, she struggled to get a job and keep things going. I was lucky that I had her after my father died when I was 7. I suppose, where does one get self-confidence from? Well, it took me a long time. I had to work at it. I suppose friends did. People who encouraged me, you know, teachers at school, friends who encouraged me, and said, just keep going, don't hold yourself back. And in the end, I began to recover, get a sort of sense of belief. I also happen to believe in the politics I was putting forward. I know politicians don't have such a good name these days, but I actually believe that politics is worthy in terms of changing things for the better for our fellow human beings. And so I met a lot of friends in politics, and all together, these people encouraged me and made me feel maybe I can do these things, maybe I can believe in myself. But it was a process. It doesn't come overnight.
Oh, well, here's a question to you, which sort of naturally follows on from that, as it happens, from Lindy. But by the way, it's always the girls who are talking to you, not the chaps. But anyway,
I should be so lucky.
What is the most useful thing that you could say or do for the child refugees that, and this is her local town she refers to, that my local town of Belper is soon to welcome into our community? What's the most useful thing that they can do to welcome them?
What the local community?
Yes. The local community in Belper, child refugees in her local community.
Well, first of all, take them to heart, help them to feel part of the local community, not different, but part of the local community. Whether the path is through sport or through some leisure activity, learning language and so on, make them feel part of it. Make them feel and help them to feel that they belong. Look, you know,
that could include anything from sort of sewing to playing sports or painting, or even helping others needing help yourself.
Yes. Absolutely, all of that. Anything that makes you contribute to the local community, and doing it with other people in the local community. So you're doing it all together as refugees helping. I think these are the important things. You know, what we try and do is to normalize life for refugees. I know it sounds a terrible word, normalize, but to make
it's all right. We're used to it. It is a terrible word, probably. Yeah.
And to make them feel that they're part of their local community, they can contribute, they can take part, they don't have to feel different, that they can do it, but they also that they have a contribution to make because their own background. They probably have things that they can do which their contemporaries can't do. So all these things together make up a picture. But above all, get them involved, get them doing these things.
Well, here's I think this must have to be the last question. I'm sure there are lots more for you, but let me assume this is the last one. This comes from Jake. We've got a chat now. This is good. All right. Could you, Alf, name some individuals who came to the UK as a refugee and have since made great contributions to the UK? And modestly, you will leave yourself aside, perhaps.
Oh God! Oh, there's a long. I can't say how. There's a long list of people. I think the main problem is that I was one of the youngest, and so most of them are older, and they're not always around. But there's some refugees who've campaigned hard for their fellow refugees. They've worked with the local groups. They've worked with faith groups, with synagogues. They've done all these things. I don't think I can mention any names. I can think of a few, but that wouldn't be fair. I've met so many who've actually determined to play their part and do what they can to help this country. And what I say always is that I would like to feel that the young refugees that are coming to Britain today are given the same opportunities and welcome that I was given. I think that is actually my ambition for them. But I could go through a list of names, but I'd have to.
It would be difficult to do that. But obviously there are some who have made a great contribution, and that much of that must be due to people like yourself who've really done it.
Well, they're doing it today as well. I mean, there are people who come in the fields of medicine, in the fields, in the academic world, in the fields of science, at a local level, in working in communities. There are all sorts of people who are making contributions, and people can make their contributions in their own way. Don't expect every refugee to be an Einstein. There's only one Einstein every 3 generations. That's not what it's about. What it's about, that everybody should be able to make a contribution to the best of their potential and ability. That's what it is. And some people do it at a local level, some people do it at a national level. And some people get their names in lights and some people don't. But my sense of it is that refugees, what they're anxious to do is to get jobs, is to get education, to get jobs, and be part of our society. They don't want to be on the dole. They don't want to be sitting around doing nothing. What they want to do is to be given the necessary help to get into our education, to get into our communities, and to be able to make their contribution. That's what they ask. That's what they ask me. They want to tell me they want to do, and really, we've got to facilitate that. That's our job.
Lord Dubs, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm going to invite Mary, the esteemed chair of the Ruth Hayman Trust, to say a few words to end this. Mary, how about you?
I'd like to thank you both hugely. Lord Dubs, I couldn't agree more with everything you've said, and I think in the Ruth Hayman Trust we see lots of refugees who make amazing contributions and do get on to get good jobs and work, and people like Naima who are then giving back things, which is fantastic. And probably most people don't know about this, all the good things that refugees are doing. Perhaps we ought to be kind of publicising that more. Anyway, it's been a fantastic interview, Sue. Thank you so much for everything and all the preparation you've put into it. We're really lucky to have such wonderful patrons. Can I
it was a great pleasure to see all of you together. But just to butt in, do you also have children that you deal with who don't have families, Mary?
No, we don't directly deal with children. We deal with adults. So we give grants to adults. But I think that, if you've got a happy family and, that must rub off on the children and adults who are achieving. But I'd just like to say something about the money we've raised. So through this event, we were aiming for £2,000. We've actually had a very large donation from somebody, which is absolutely amazing. And although we say we've raised over £900, in fact, there's quite a lot more coming in. So I'd like to thank everybody who's supported us. And we're particularly delighted to have this sort of large donation, which has come in Refugee Week. And I think,
of course, I should have mentioned right at the top, we're dead in the middle of Refugee Week, aren't we? Appropriate.
Absolutely, we are, yes. And our fundraising is specifically for refugee education. So
fantastic.
A huge thank you to both of you. It's been a learning experience for us doing our first online event. And I think we'll probably be less nervous about it the next time. But thank you. But thank you to everybody. And
I have a feeling Alf wants to butt in here. Alf.
Well, I'm just going to say, could I just say thank you very much indeed, and thank you for putting up with me and asking me the nice questions, and thank you for having me along, and good luck to what you're doing, and thank you very much, and thank you to the audience for the questions. Look, we're all in this together.
Thank you, and I think we'd really want to support you in any kind of work you're doing in Parliament to promote things for refugees. So, but anyway, we'll be in touch, I hope.
I'm sure she'll be in touch, Alf, so watch out.
Well, you know where I am. I think you know where I am, so just let me know. But seriously, a sincere thank you to all of you in the audience and to the two of you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody. Oh, I know one thing I was going to say, which I'm awfully sorry I forgot, is that if there's anyone in the audience who would like to join us, follow us on Facebook or social media, or get our newsletters, please get in touch with us. And our email info@ruthhaymantrust.org.uk. We'd be happy to respond. So hopefully we'll get some more followers from today.
That's great. Good. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.